We now come to my favorite statement connective, the material conditional, which is most often expressed by if, then. It's easier to just call this what it is, the conditional. It's symbolized by the horseshoe. For example, take the statement, if Maria is a practicing attorney, then she has passed the bar exam. That statement can be symbolized as M, horseshoe, E. Every conditional has two parts, the antecedent, that is the statement that follows the if, and the consequent, the statement that follows the then. And here's the rule for conditional. The conditional is false if and only if its antecedent is true and its consequent is false. Otherwise, the conditional is true, and I recommend that you memorize this rule. There are English words and phrases that we can substitute for if, then. These include expressions such as is sufficient for, provided, supposing that, on the assumption that, only if, and implies. When we use these in English, they often signal whether the antecedent or consequent is following the word or phrase in question. Let's take a look at some examples. Maria's being a practicing attorney is sufficient for her having passed the bar exam. Maria has passed the bar exam provided she is a practicing attorney. Supposing that Maria is a practicing attorney, she has passed the bar exam. All of these are conditional statements, so they all contain antecedents and consequents, but which is which? Let's let the blue line underscore the antecedent and the red line underscore the consequent. In the first conditional, is sufficient for precedes the consequent. In the second, provided precedes the antecedent. In the third, supposing that precedes the antecedent. Here's a few more examples. Again, we have three conditionals, each of which has an antecedent and a consequent. And here are the results. Again, we'll let the blue line underscore the antecedent and the red line underscore the consequent. In the first conditional, the antecedent follows the expression on the assumption that. In the second, only if precedes the consequent. And in the third, implies precedes the consequent. One important thing to note. When we symbolize conditionals, we always place the antecedent first, then the consequent, regardless of the order of their mention in English. So we have antecedent, horseshoe, consequent. Remember when we examined necessary and sufficient conditions earlier in the course? We can sharpen our understanding of this distinction in our analysis of conditionals. The consequent states a necessary condition for the antecedent. In other words, Maria can't be a practicing attorney in the absence of passing the bar exam. The antecedent states a sufficient condition for the consequent. Maria's being a practicing attorney is sufficient for her having passed the bar exam, in the sense that the former guarantees the latter. Remember that a sufficient condition is enough all by itself to make a statement true, but which may not be the only way to make it true. Here's what I've been saying wrapped up in a sidebar. Necessary and sufficient conditions matter to a material conditional since, first, its consequent is a necessary but not sufficient condition for the truth of its antecedent, and, secondly, its antecedent is a sufficient, though not a necessary condition for the truth of its consequent. So, once again, the consequent is a necessary condition for the truth of the antecedent, and the antecedent is a sufficient condition for the truth of the consequent. This concludes this segment. Please continue to the next.